Hey everyone, welcome to Jira Administration for Beginners. Today we're going to be focusing on workflows and I'm going to go over a lot of stuff. So this one's actually going to be pretty action packed. We're going to be covering a lot of information on this one. And I'm hoping that by the end of this, you know everything you need to know. I'm probably going to give you about 80% of what you need to know with respect to creating workflows. So it's going to be an in-depth one. So think of this as a primer, a full breadth, end to end. How do we create workflows? How do we work with workflows in Jira? And it's going to be technical. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Make sure you drop a like, and let's jump into the rest of this material. So, a couple friendly reminders before we get too far. This session is being recorded and will be available on this YouTube channel. So, if you're not subscribed to this YouTube channel, you want to make sure you take a second here to hit that subscribe button. The slides are not available, but they will be in. But we're going to be inside of Jira. So I don't normally use slides. I don't normally do a whole lot with the slides. So just know that we're going to be in Jira. So come back, rewatch this, slow things down, pay special attention to everywhere I click because there's a lot that's going to be covered in this particular session. Again, make sure you subscribe to the channel because this is not just the only class that I do. I actually have a lot of videos, and so you want to make sure you don't want to miss out. Now, very importantly, there's a chat here on your right-hand side, so make sure you say hello. Let me know where you're tuning in from. If you have any questions at any point, again, we're going to cover a lot of technical stuff, and so if you're confused on anything or something just goes right over your head, feel free to stop me. I will be monitoring that chat there on the side, and so we'll get there as well. I do have a couple of exclusive offers for you here at the end, and so we want to make sure we stick around for that. But more importantly, Liz, we got a few people coming in. Okay, so I just wanted to do a quick mic check, make sure y'all heard me. Sounds like Liz and Bill, you're able to hear me because you are putting in where you're tuning in from. So, welcome, Liz. Always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for being here, Liz. We got Bill D. We have Parthipan. So, hello from India. Loud and clear, Liz. Thank you so much. Amit from India as well. So, thank you all for tuning in. Let's jump into some of the material here because, like as I mentioned, I'm going to come back to that one. We have a lot to cover. So we're going to talk about statuses. We're going to talk about transitions, global transitions. What's the difference? How to apply workflows, how to delete statuses, how to delete transitions. We'll talk about post functions, validators, and conditions. Now, my name's Alex. If you never seen me before, I do a thing here on YouTube where I teach people how to use Jira and some of the other Atlassian tools. I have the ACP 120 and the ACP 520. I'm currently about halfway studying for the ACP 620, and I'm hoping to take the test within the next month or so. I have this main channel, Ape Tech Tutorials, but I also have another channel called the Jira Life, and we're aggressively trying to grow the Jira Life. So if you haven't already, I'm going to drop a link here in the link tree in the chat. Here's my link tree. Go check out my podcast called The Jira Life. It's really, really cool. We got to talk to the CEO of Atlassian recently. A lot of information there. But we talk to anybody and everybody in the Atlassian ecosystem. So definitely go check that one out. All right. Let's jump into it. So we're going into Jira. We're gonna go straight into Jira, and we're gonna have some fun here. We're gonna have a lot of fun with Jira. All right. So let's start workflows. First of all, a lot of what I cover here is going to apply to both team and company, but we're going to be focusing on company managed workflows because in team managed workflows, while you can do a lot, I would say you could probably do 80% of what you can do in a company managed workflow. So the focus is going to be on the company one because that's really where the breadth of all the complexity is. And so we're going to go into company managed workflows first. And so the easiest way to get to a workflow is to click on the gear here and you go to work items. And once you're inside of work items, there's a section down here called workflows. And within that section, there's going to be two things. There's going to be the workflow and the workflow scheme. And so naturally, you might be asking yourself, what's the difference? Well, the workflow is really what you care about. The workflow is where you put statuses, transitions, where you link things together in the workflow. So that's the most important, that's the most critical part. The scheme is like a bucket, and you put one or many workflows into that scheme slash bucket. And this is important for two reasons. Reason number one is that each issue type or work type, if you're updating your lingo, In the chat, let me know. Have you transitioned fully to starting using work types, or are you still using issue types? Because in my mind, everything's still an issue. But let me know in the chat, how was the transition from issue to work going for you? Because as you can see, I'm struggling. I am struggling here. So, all right. So we have work types, and out of the box, all of those work types share a single workflow, but they don't have to. Especially in company managed projects, you can have multiple workflows. In fact, you can have up to one workflow per work type. And so that scheme, that workflow scheme, is kind of like the holder, because out of the box, you have one workflow for all your work types, but because you can get complicated, you can start creating a lot of different workflows and you keep them all together in your scheme. And so that's what the scheme is for, at least one purpose. The second purpose is that in company managed projects, these workflows are shareable. So unlike team managed, where it's very siloed and it's just for that particular project, inside of a company managed project, you can share your workflows, and you do that by sharing the scheme, the workflow scheme. And so that's why we have the two. So hopefully, um, hopefully that's clear on what the differences are between workflows and workflow schemes. So Ted's all full on board on the work items. Barbara from KC, having a hard habit breaking, but getting there. I am trying, Barbara. I am trying. I am struggling, but I am trying. Scott's in the same boat. We're managing. We're trying to figure it out. But yeah, those are those issues, man. It's hard to get out of it. 25 years of issues, and then all of a sudden we're on work items. Okay. So, anyways, so that's the workflow. So what do we now? That's the difference between the workflows and the workflow scheme. So typically, what do we do? What's the whole point here? Why are we even talking about workflows? Well, to answer that question, I got to tell you what a workflow is, right? And so the workflow is a Jira's representation of your process inside of the tool, right? And so think of how you do work. And let's just assume you're a developer and you have to write code. Well, you don't just, jump into Visual Studio Code and start coding, right? You got to have some requirements. Those requirements need to be vetted, they need to be validated, they need to be real requirements. Then something gets assigned to you as a developer, then you work on it. That's when you're actually writing code. But then when you finish writing your code, there's like a whole DevOps life cycle to it, right? There's code reviews, peer reviews, there's automated testing, unit testing, there's integration testing, there's QA, there's your product owner review, right? There's a bunch of different steps that happen before, during, and after for any particular story or any particular task. And so those steps, right? What happens in each phase, or or at least from a process perspective, those are the things that get captured in your workflows. And so most of the time as admins, we have to tweak. We either have to create a brand new workflow, or we tweak existing workflows to capture our individual processes, our business processes, and put them into Jira, put them into a language that that Jira understands. And that's where the workflows come into. And so I mentioned you have two paths here, right? You typically operate in one of two ways. You either A, create a brand new workflow, in which case you would click on this big blue button up here, create a new workflow here, or B, and B is my preferred way, you modify an existing workflow, because a magical thing happens every time you create a brand new Jira project. A workflow is created for that project. So Jira doesn't leave you in the out by yourself, right? Every single time you create a project, you either inherit an existing workflow if you're company managed, or you have a brand new workflow that's just the default workflow that Jira ships with. And so most of the time, you're either gonna have to modify that existing workflow, or you're gonna have to create a new workflow. Now, I'm gonna walk you through the steps here to create a new workflow. Okay, so you come again to the gear, you go to work items, you go to workflows, and then on the right hand side, you're gonna be greeted with this blue button to create a workflow. So I'm gonna create a new one. Now, last week, we actually talked about this import before we get too far. This doesn't actually do anything. And so everybody that was on my call last week, we couldn't figure it out. So in this call, the challenge for you all is, what does this import from marketplace button do? Has anybody ever actually successfully used this import from marketplace? We tried, we pondered, we had theories, but nobody was able to give us concrete evidence. So in this chat, have you ever successfully used this import from marketplace button? Because we thought that it would be great because you have an export button, right? There's an ability for you to export your workflows. We thought that it would be great for you to be able to import your workflows, but we couldn't even find that button either. So if somebody is smarter than us in the chat here, let us know if you actually know how to import a workflow, because I would love to know how to do that. Okay, so we're going to create a new workflow. And one of the things that you need to know is that there is a style, there is a text style for how to name workflows. Atlassian, if I click cancel here, usually takes the key. It takes the key for your project, so whatever project you're working out of, and or attaches it to the end, right? So it takes, like if you're in a software project, it's going to say software simplified workflow, and then for project, and then the key, the whatever key you have for your project. So if you're in a Jira software template, that's usually what happens. So those workflows are automatically created for you. I would recommend that you do something very, very similar. I would recommend you follow some similar fashion. Otherwise, your workflows are going to look very, very weird. Also, if you don't name them, if you don't give yourself a hint as to what's the purpose of that workflow, then later, 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, you might go back and look at it and go, well, what the heck was this workflow for? So be smart, give yourself a good name, give yourself a good description, right? And so I'm going to go workflow for software demo. Again, give yourself a good description. I'm not very creative here. I don't have an actual business case to create a workflow, but usually when I create a workflow, I have a business reason to do it. Okay, so my workflow has been created, and we are greeted with this text view. Now, unless you're Rodney, unless you're this crazy Rodney guy that I know who loves working out of the text editor, I prefer to be in the diagram editor. Now, there's two methods here, right? You have the text editor, which again, you have to be a crazy person to like. No offense to everybody else who uses the text editor, by the way, but this is a direct jab at Rodney, because I know he's going to be trolling me later in the chat here. But the diagram view is the best view, in my opinion. I welcome you to challenge me that the diagram is not the best view. But in addition to that, we also have a legacy editor and a new editor for this. And so we're going to be sticking with legacy because old habits die hard, and I've been using this legacy view since like 2016. But there is a new editor, and if you've ever managed or configured a workflow in a team managed project, then you've seen the new editor. I'm not a big fan. I prefer this one here. So we're going to show you with the old one, at least until Atlassian rips it out of my cold dead hands. And yeah, we have so we have Christopher, who's actually used an import for a workflow from the marketplace. So we're gonna have to take a look at that. And then Scott, yeah, diagram for the win. Okay, so here we have a brand new workflow, and I'm just gonna kind of break you down what we're seeing here, right? So this little bubble here, this little black circle, indicates our starting point. So the moment that a user hits the create button and they put in the title and they hit this blue create button, that triggers Jira to go into the very first step. So depending on that work type, it's going to start here and it's going to follow its way and go to that very first status. So whatever that first status is, it's going to be very, very critical. Okay. And so most workflows have like to do. If you're in a Kanban one, you're going to have like backlog, and open is another one of these default ones that usually ship with Jira. Now, this is the very first status. So you want to make sure that when you look at your process, when you're looking at how your company does work, what is the very first step that you and your team want to take? Now, the other thing I'm going to tell you is that I'm a big fan. This is not a hard rule. This is just my opinion, but I am a huge fan of basically having your workflow statuses be nouns. They're destinations, because a lot of folks will confuse or make your status the transition, like start work or something like that, right? And so we'll talk about transitions in a moment, but I like to kind of differentiate. The transition is something that you do, and the status is something you are because you've landed somewhere. But again, doesn't always translate very well like that. But I like to give people that advice, because to folks that have never created a workflow before, it gives you a basis to understand how to work out of this. Now, Liz is saying the text editor is a go-to, but I think it's because I'm used to doing everything in Notepad. In Notepad, not Notepad plus plus, but Notepad. Okay, so Liz, you're taking it old school to the OG Notepad. I can make templates faster, and IntelliJ doesn't always make it easy. Liz, you are You overly complicate your life. I like drag and drop. I like pictures. I am so glad that we have a mouse. Hi, Ivan. Welcome. Okay. So so the moment you hit that create button, wherever this little black circle is attached to, and in some screens it might be purple. I think I've seen it like a dark blue. It's going to be connected to that status. Okay. So that very first status is very, very important. But what happens if you want to change your status? What happens if you don't want to call it open? What happens if you wanted to say new? In the chat, can I do this? What happens if I do this? If I click on my status, let's just say I don't want it to say open, I want it to say new, right? If I click on that status, I'm going to have the pencil here, and I can rename this to new. In the chat, what happens if I hit save? And this is mainly to see if Ronnie is paying attention. If I hit save, folks, what is the consequence of me clicking on save? Can anybody guess? What is the consequence? What catastrophic thing is going to happen the moment I click on that blue button? I'm very curious to hear your thoughts because you should never, in my opinion, in my professional opinion, in my humble professional opinion, you should never rename a status in Jira. Okay. And so via Medic, via Medici, via Medici has this, via Medici has this correct, right? So the moment that I hit save, everybody that used to use open, all of their statuses will be renamed to new. And every filter and every board and everything that changed or used to reference open will not be broken. And look at that. We even rhyme here on ATech, right? And so you should never, ever, 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 under any circumstance, rename your status. Ever. Ronnie says, was outside watering flowers. So you might be disappointed not firing me. Right. So you should, Cody's right here. It changes everything, right? Sounds like a resume generating event. Yes. You will, in my 2 cents, if you rename a status and you work for me, I fire you. So never, ever, ever rename it. But it makes sense though, right? It makes sense why you would want to rename it because it's so innocent, especially when you're new to Jira to go, oh, I don't want to call it open. I want to call it new. Ooh, there's an edit button. Ooh, it lets me rename it. Right. And so this is a trap. Don't fall victim to this trap because Jira will hate you and your team's not going to be very happy with you. So how do we do it then? How do we rename a status? Well, the easiest way is to make a new status, right? And so you're going to click on add status over here in the left-hand corner, and you're going to simply type in the name of that new status. Now, if you create a status for the very first time, you will see that Jira knows that it's a new status and will have new status in parentheses. But if you're using a status that already exists in the pool of available statuses, you won't see that messaging. As a good rule of thumb, try to reuse as much as you can. The more statuses you have, the crazier and more chaotic and more harder it is to manage your Jira. So always reuse and recycle whenever you can, understanding that sometimes you can't, but try to, right? And especially make a good call when you have like new, newish, newer, right? When they're all so close to each other in the name, you might want to put your foot down as a Jira admin and say, nope, we're just gonna go with new. Okay, so that's how we get a new status. Now, this little checkbox we're gonna come back to in a second, but for now I'm gonna leave it alone. So I'm just gonna simply click on this add button, and we have an existing status. So this is very key. This is a new status to the workflow, but this status of new already existed. It was already available in my general pool of statuses. There's an extra step you have to take if you create a new status. So if you were to create a brand new status, right? So I'm going to go newish. You'll notice again that it says new in parentheses, new status. So when I click on that, that creates the status, kind of. But when you click on add, you are presented with a new screen. And this, what you have to do here is essentially pick the color, the category. Is it going to be a to-do? Is it going to be an in progress? Or is it going to be a done issue or status? And so you do need to make that determination. This is something you need to decide. This is pretty important. Not too important, but important enough that you can't proceed to the next step without making a selection. And so let's talk about when should you do it in to do, when should it be in progress, and when should it be done? Well, if the work is going to be new, right? If it just got created, the work is at rest, right? There's nothing happening with that work. then it should be a to-do status. This is work that is resting, it's sitting, it's not being touched by anyone, and the expectation is that nobody's working on it yet. So that should be gray to do. Anytime that work is in motion, that there's a handoff, somebody's doing something, it's actively being worked on, that's an in progress. Okay. Maybe you're not doing that work, but somebody else is doing work. Somebody's billing for that. And so that's an in progress. And then finally, when work comes to a final resting state, that's when you should have a green done status. But you should always refrain from your creating too many done statuses because there's other behavior that you're going to need to be aware of that we're going to cover in the rest of this video. So we'll leave it at to do. We'll hit create. And now we have a newish status. Now, if I want to delete a status, it's very, very easy. All you need to do is select that status and remove the status, but you're not deleting it. You're simply removing it. Okay. And the bad thing about this is because we have now created a new status, newish, that status now exists, right? And it exists for everybody. Everybody can use it. And so if you truly want to delete a status, you have to come over here on the left-hand side, still within the Jira admin settings, but you come over here to the left-hand side, and then you will find your status. They're not in alphabetical order, and usually doing a control F will help you. But you see that all the way down here is my newish status. And as long as it is not associated to any workflow, so you might have to go dig, and you might have to go on a little bit of a scavenger hunt and delete workflows and whatnot. But as long as it's not in a workflow, you will have the option to delete a status. And this permanently deletes the status, right? So now, if I go back to my workflow that I was working on, and of course, I'm not going to remember the name of my workflow, so bear with me for like 2 seconds while I remember what I think it had the word demo in it. There we go. Here we go. Right. So as long as, so now when I go back to my workflow and I try to add my newish status, it's gone. So basically, I'm reprompted to recreate it. So that's how you delete, and that's the difference between removing and deleting a status. So you can remove it from a workflow. That's cool, but it still exists somewhere. Or you can go to that status section and completely delete it. So again, a little bit more drastic, but in case you wanted to fully clean up a mistake, that's how you do it. Okay, so we have a new status, and we have open, and we want to swap these out. We want, when a new issue is created, we want it to go to new, not to open. Well, this, my friends, is really, really easy, but if you don't know what you're doing, it can be very, very hard. And so what you're going to want to do is you're going to click on this line. You want to click on the line coming out from that black circle, and you want to look for the tiny, tiny little, teeny little circle, black circle down here. Everybody see that in the chat? Give me a thumbs up. Give me a +1. Do you see this tiny little black circle on top of the open status? Okay. This little black circle can be really hard to navigate to, right? But essentially, you put your mouse over it and you wait for it to become a little plus. This is key. If you try to do it anywhere else, it's not going to work. You have to hover, and you got to precisely aim and make sure that this little thing turns into a plus button. From there, click and hold, drag and drop over to the new status. You're going to click on save. That pop-up is always going to be there. And now you successfully have updated your create. So when you hit create, it's going to go to that status. Now we can safely remove the status. Okay. But let's take a little sidebar. Let's take a little side quest for you all. I want you to pay attention to this word here, inactive. What does this mean? Does anybody in the chat know what is inactive? What does it mean to have a workflow that is inactive? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Do we care? Anybody want to take a guess? Who in the chat? Who's paying attention? Who wants to tell me what is an inactive workflow? Who's got a good summary of it? Let's see if anybody. Let's see who's awake. Who had their coffee this morning? What is the benefit, or what is an inactive workflow? Ronnie says it's a good thing if you want to delete workflows. That is very true. This is kind of where I'm going with it, right? I'm teeing it up, Ronnie. I'm trying to get everybody ready for it. Liz says, is it like install in prod? Not necessarily. I don't think so. Barbara says it's not being used by any projects. This is a very good guess. So yes, so you can't have an inactive workflow, which basically means nobody's using the workflow, right? It's not installed to XSpace. Correct. Yes. So flow that is currently not used, a workflow that's currently not used in a project. Perfect. You all are nailing this perfectly, right? So an inactive workflow is a workflow that just exists in Jira, but it's not being used by anybody. And this is very, very important, folks. There's a reason why I'm talking about this because we just removed a status from this workflow. Awesome. I'm going to take a little sidebar. We're going to come back to this. Okay. I'm going to go back to Jira. I'm going to go into my an existing project. I'm going to go into this customer B1. I'm going to click on these ellipses, go to project settings because FYI spoilers, the project settings have moved. I'm going to go to workflows and I'm going to open up this workflow here for this particular project. And over here, I'm going to click on this edit workflow. All right. Now in here, I have a status of backlog. Well, what if I wanted to change it to new? Well, I could do exactly what we did, right? Remember, we never, ever, ever rename. So we never rename it. But I could, click on new, do this, right? Drop it in here. Okay. Find that little plus button, move it on over here, click the save button, and we're good, right? Except we don't want that backlog one anymore. So just like I did with the other one, we're going to remove the status. We're going to remove the status. Well, you can't. You can't remove statuses from an active workflow because Jira. I don't know. I don't have a good reason. All I know is that you cannot remove statuses from an active workflow. So you got to keep that in mind, right? Liz says she spent 2 hours trying to figure out the magical recipe for deleting and install Bitbucket app when the manifest is deleted. Do not lose where workflows are used. Yes. keep track of your stuff. Okay. So how the heck do we remove a status then? Well, the unfortunate reality is you cannot, at least not from an active workflow. And so anytime that you see this appear draft or shared by, right, or just active in general, you will not be able to remove statuses from active workflows. So the easiest trick, and this is the one I like to do, is I like to come over here, grab the name, because I have like ADD and I also have the memory of Dory from Finding Nemo. Click on workflows here on the left, go under the active section, find your workflow, then come over to actions for that workflow, make a copy, give it a good name, give it a more descriptive name. Do not have copy of, right? And give it a good name. And when you hit copy, you will have an inactive workflow that then you can remove the status from. So that's how you do that. Okay. And Victoria, because Jira. I love that reason. Yeah. It's my favorite reason. Ronnie, let's put that one on the t-shirt list because Jira. All right. You can't remove status even if there's no work items assigned to that status on the active workflow. That is correct. So as long as the workflow is active, it doesn't matter if it doesn't have a single issue at all. As long as that workflow is an active workflow, you will not be able to remove the status. You have to basically make a copy and then remove it from the copy. Okay. Then the question is like, well, now I have a copy. How do I put it back in the project? Well, stay tuned. Make sure you don't drop off because we're going to be covering all those details. Now, I'm going to cancel out of this because this was a little side quest and we're done with that side quest. And we're going to go back into our workflow that we've been working out of and go back into it to finish editing it here, right? So now that's how we remove a status. And that's how we update this thing. So we're making progress, right? We're making really, really good progress. And so now, naturally, what you want to do is you want to add more statuses, right? So now here's where you can add a status of in progress, right? So we have in progress, we can click add, right? And then we can add our status of done, okay? Now, fundamentally, what I just did, there's a couple of things that are very, very wrong with this. Anybody want to take a guess? Where are my experts at? What's wrong with this workflow? Something is not quite right. And you may think like, hey, Alex, well, I added the statuses. Awesome. I should be good, right? Except if we went through the challenge, right? If we went through the steps of making this workflow active, applying it to our project, it will not work. And Scott's got the answer here. No transitions. So what's a transition? Well, a transition allows us to go from one status to another. Because fun fact, if you don't add a transition at all, and if we were to publish this workflow here, what you will see inside of Jira when you go to the status in the dropdown, you will see new, but you won't see anything else. You will not see in progress. You will not see done, even though they are in the workflow. If there is no line going into a status, then that status in Jira's eyes technically doesn't exist. And this is a little bit of a little cheat code that I use. Earlier, moments ago, when I was trying to remove that backlog status, what I do to cheat, especially if the project is new and I'm too lazy to make the copies and all the other hoops you have to go through, what I simply do is I remove any transitions to that status, and that status is by all Jira's definition gone. The only time this doesn't work is if you already have a bunch of issues or work items in that status. They will stay in that status, and now you kind of break the whole thing. So don't do that on a very active workflow. But if you're working on something new, this is a great way to just say, okay, I don't want this status. Don't put any transitions. Jira will ignore it. Okay, Jira will ignore that status. Now, how do we add a status then? Well, there's two ways of adding statuses. And remember, I'm a firm believer that a status should have that a transition should be a verb, right? So the easiest way to add a status is to create what's called a global transition. Now, the global transition requires your transitions to not even be a verb because it doesn't care. Okay. And the easiest way to add a global transition is to click on a status, and then you will see a checkbox. You see this checkbox here. And then when you create a new status, you'll notice that when you add a new status, you will notice that there's the same checkboxes over here. So you have two opportunities to add this little checkbox. Okay. But you select the status, you click on this, allow all statuses to transition to this one, and you are essentially creating what's called a global transition. Now, this workflow here, this will work. This is I will grade it an 8 out of 10 on the workflow. This workflow will work. It will be functional-ish in Jira. Can anybody tell me what's the problem with my workflow now? For the experts in the room, there's something wrong. There's something very, very wrong with my workflow. I'll give you a hint. I'll click over here. There's something very, very wrong with my workflow. Can anybody tell me what's wrong while I describe what's going on in this workflow? Okay. So again, I got the A players over here in the chat trying to figure out what's wrong with my workflow, because this will work 80% of the time, but we're going to crash catastrophically that last 20%. But let's talk about this all transition. What does this actually mean? So what this status tells us is that when you are in a status of in progress, you are allowed to transition to any other status that has a transition available. And so because of this global transition, it means that any status can transition to this one, to that status that I want to go to. So I can go from in progress to new. I can go from new straight to done. I can go from done back to new, right? I can go any which way because these global transitions allow us to jump however we want. Now, the great thing from a Jira administrator perspective is that your job is done. You could get in and out and create a workflow in like 30 seconds or less. Awesome. Bad thing is your team can now go straight from new to done in 2 seconds. And that might be bad. That might be pretty bad, right? And Justin, done won't be setting. Yeah, so that is the exact answer I was looking for. So pat on the back, Justin. You definitely got this right. You were not jumping ahead. You are answering the question that I posed to the experts in the room. Okay. So we'll get, for everybody else, we'll come back to that. We're going to talk about Justin's answer here in just a second. But let me finish talking to you about the pros and the cons of these global transitions. So again, just to recap, the pro is from a Jira admin perspective, chef's kiss. You're done in 10 seconds. You can make a workflow very, very easily. It's scalable. It's clean. It's sleek. It works. Awesome. From a user's perspective, this is the worst thing ever because users can now cheat. They can go straight from done from to do to done and skip the entire process. So if you have 50 steps in your workflow, hope you don't, but if you did, and they all have global transitions, you can go from new to done and skip all 48 in between. And that could be either a really, really good thing or it can be a really, really bad thing. And so be very, very careful here. The other caveat that you need to know is if I add another status of like in review, right? This is usually a pretty popular status. You're going to notice that my in review is blue as well. It's in progress. But the next thing that you need to know is that these statuses are rendered to the user in alphabetical order by color. Now, there is a property that you can modify. Ronnie, you got to remind me here in the chat, what is the name of this property? Because you tell me every single time and I always forget it. But there's a workflow property. You can see that there's a properties option here, a little bit more advanced. I wouldn't mess with this too much unless you actually have to. But with this properties here, you can then do the property that Ronnie's going to put in the chat, assuming he's not watering his plants again. But there's a property you can put here to then determine the order of your statuses. But normally, as a general rule of thumb, if you do not go into advanced mode, then you should just tell your users that these statuses are rendered in alphabetical order by color. And that's really all you need to worry about. And so what I mean by that is if I do this, let me see if I know my alphabet correctly. HIJKLMNOP, QR, right? So R comes after P. Sorry about that. I don't always sing my alphabet in public. But when I do, I make sure I do it during a live stream. But yeah, so if you were to render these in reverse, right? If you were to set them, okay, I want in review to happen first and then in progress, well, Jira is not going to care. It's going to give you in progress first because P comes before R, and then in review will come after in that drop down. So again, the order here doesn't matter. In fact, if you do this, Jira won't matter. Like it's still going to show you the list, the order. So this right here, how you architect your workflow visually is just for your eyes only to make your life easier, but it doesn't actually do anything in Jira. All right. So we have our transitions. Awesome. This right here, my friends, is a beautiful workflow. I'm done with it. I'm ready to apply it to a project. But there's a second way of doing workflows, transitions. This is the easiest way. But sometimes, depending on the culture of your company, depending on your culture of your teams, sometimes this doesn't work. Sometimes this is too hard. And not hard because the transitions are easy or free, I should say, flexible, but it's hard because your users can't be trusted to have that autonomy, that freedom and flexibility that this gives you. And Ted, right here, thank you so much. Yes, ops bar sequence. This is the workflow property that you want to put in there. So thank you so much, Ted, and thank you so much, Scott, for providing that. Ronnie left me hanging. I think he's still watering those plants. Okay. So that's the ops bar. Okay, so anyway, so what happens when your user can't be trusted, right? What happens when they just like jump around and they go from new to done, bypassing the whole workflow? Well, we have a remedy for that, and that is to basically undo these allow all statuses. Little tier because as a Jira admin, I love these because it makes my workflow easy. Makes it very, very easy. And so the next way to do this, um, what do these colors go to? Which colors list? The gray and the blue and the green? Let me know. Okay, so the next step is to create your workflow. And I like to do a little bit of a ladder. This is kind of where workflows become a bit of an art. And so I like to ladder mine up. I am in priorities. Oh, well, properties or priorities? We'll come back list. Okay, so you can transition an explicit transition and go from new, and you got to hover over this little circle. You got to click and hold and drag it to another bubble. Okay. And so once you're here, you will then have to give it a name. And this is one of my pet peeves. I hate it when people give me a workflow. And this is really common, right? You'll ask your business or somebody, give me a workflow, and they give you like a little diagram with a bunch of rectangles and lines connecting them. They're really good at giving you the workflow status, but they always forget the transition name. Every arrow, every line needs to have a name in Jira. And so this is going to be like start work, right? A verb. I like to do this as a verb. And so we now have a transition from new to in progress. Awesome. We can then go from in progress to in review, right? Dev complete, right? At least you think, at least you hope. And then we can go from in review to done and say accepted or something like that, right? Again, verbs that we did, and our transitions are now good. And so if I were to publish this workflow, I would have 2 thumbs up, right? Kind of. Except in the chat, for those of you paying attention, what's wrong with my workflow now? And man, the theme of this one is what's wrong with my workflow? Something's fundamentally wrong with my workflow. Can anybody guess? Except, okay, so I will tell you that don't worry about the resolution. We'll talk about the resolution in just a couple of seconds here. But what is wrong with my workflow? So Scott, yeah. So Scott, that's the obvious one. Let's not worry about resolution. We're gonna set resolution. I promise you, we will come back to the resolution. But there's something else. Ronnie, ugly. It's beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Okay, this is a beautiful workflow for me. There's fundamentally something wrong with my workflow. And again, it's not the resolution. Can anybody guess what are we doing wrong here? Something we did it all right, but something's missing. Something is there is wrong. So Barbara says there is no way to go back to in progress if you need to from in review. And Barbara's got it right. And Justin's got it right here as well. Okay. It's too waterfall to be beautiful. Okay. So Barbara and Justin, again, two pats on the back here because yes, you're absolutely correct. Because we don't have these global transitions anymore, you will only be able to transition with whatever lines you actually put. So if you have a transition to go from one status to the other, yay, Jira will like it. But if you do not put a transition to go back, then there's nothing in the world that's going to let you go back. So you have to come in here and you have to add a transition back, right? So this like not ready yet, right? Maybe needs more information, right? Maybe that would have been a better one. And so folks, with transitions, you can rename them. You will not get fired, right? Needs better requirements, right? You're like, I don't know. I try to do it. I couldn't do it, right? This one can be failed review, right? Okay. And then done back to in review. I don't know. Just reopened, right? Now, this is an interesting one because you don't have to go back one. You can actually go, well, let's just reopen it all the way to here. And now, my friends, this is where you start having these existential crises. This is where becoming a Jira admin, this is where we divide the junior admins from the senior admins. Because what I just did here, right, with this reopen status is the question of the year. This is what, again, separates that junior admin from that very senior admin. And the question is, when you reopen something, should it go to in progress? Or should it go to new? Or should it go to a new status called reopened? Right? These are existential crisis questions that there's no right answer. There's no silver bullet. There's no magic pill you can drink and you're gonna have the answer to nirvana, right? But these are questions that you got to ask yourself when you're designing your workflow because when you go back, it's a little bit more of an art and less of a science. You got to figure out, well, what's the right place to go. So in the chat, if I were to reopen something, what would you do? Would you make a new status called reopen? I wouldn't, but that's an option. Would you change your new to do so that because new implies that the work is new, but if it's reopened, it's not new anymore? So that's a question, right? A thoughtful question to have. Do I move it to in progress, right? Do I just move it to in progress? And what are the benefits? What are the cons of moving it to in progress? My 2 cents is I don't like this. I don't like reopening it and moving it to in progress because you're now putting onus back on the developer, back on that individual contributor to work on something. But what if it reopened for a reason? I don't know what that reason is. So maybe I go to back to new because I want to get better requirements, right? Something happened that caused me to reopen something. Other questions to think about is should you even have a reopened? Should you just make a new story and link them together, right? So again, a lot of existential crisis type of questions that you should ask yourself that don't get covered in an ACP, but very, very important to have because when you're architecting your workflows, all of these are very valid questions. And these are valid questions that come from scars, from trying things that don't work. But you have to have an answer to these things because they, again, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So let's see what Rodney. Well, first of all, Scott said to go back to in review. I wouldn't go back into in review. I would personally go back to either new or in progress. Rodney says I've had at least 3 meetings with stakeholders that still not satisfactory answer the question just to put it back. Just put it back to the start anyway. So this is usually what I revert back to. I usually go all the way back to the beginning. But again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Via Medic says, does it make sense to work with multiple workflows in one project? One of the users predefined paths, one of them for the admin. So kind of, except you can't. So you can have a Jira project can have multiple workflows, but not the way you're describing it because each workflow has to be associated to a work type, a story, a task, an epic. But a task, a story, and an epic can only have one workflow associated to it. So you are not allowed to for a bug to have 2 different types of workflows based on role. That is not a feature of Jira. Although a pretty cool one that would highly complicate Jira, but not a feature nonetheless. List says reopened. Automate the notification that it is open. If it's for a review, go from open to review. If it's a new dev that caused the reopen, go to new item or whatever. Yeah. so a lot of different options here, right? So banish the users to Confluence whiteboards flow. Yeah. So again, lots of so many different answers, right? There's no right answers. It's kind of the takeaway here. It just depends, right? This is what makes being a Jira admin really, really hard. Okay, so we're gonna leave it here, and then we're gonna now worry about. So I promised Scott earlier that we were gonna talk about um, the resolution. So if I were to publish this workflow is gonna get me like 95% of the way there. This is a great workflow. I like this workflow, but there's still a fundamental problem, and that is when something gets moved to done, Jira is not going to respect the fact that it's moved to done. It's still going to kind of ignore things, and so you need to do what's called a resolution. And so we're going to talk about the last three things we want to talk about in this. Well, I guess we want to talk about four things in the next 5 minutes. So let's do 1 minute per thing here. So we need to add a resolution, and you add that via a post function. So you're going to click on the transition. You're going to click on post functions here, and you will then be greeted by a bunch of different things that is happening after this transition happens. So these are called post functions. So the moment that something goes from in review to done, 5 things are going to happen. You're going to set the issue status linked with the status to that destination, add a comment to an issue if one's entered during the transition, update the change history, re-index the issue to keep the databases in sync, and fire a generic event for notifications. But none of these talk about resolution. And so we're actually going to add a new post function. Okay, we're going to add a new post function. And out of the box, this is what we get. Now, I will tell you if you add some plugins, so I have things like Deep Clone, I have Elements Copy and Sync, so you might see different ones that you wouldn't see in your Jira. Because again, some marketplace apps add extra options. But the one we're looking for is update an issue field. And notice that there's a difference between custom field and issue field. And this is this is where Atlassian, if you're watching, you're changing issue everywhere, but you're not changing it everywhere. You got to change these right here. Assigns the issue. See, even Atlassian is not ready to make the full um, is not ready to make the full transition over to work items because this assigns the work item to the current user. This is update work item custom field, right? This is update work item field, not issue field. So Atlassian, you got to catch up. You got to change it everywhere. You can't just change it in a few places. So you're going to click on add. We're going to select that last one. Click on add. And then under the issue field again, Atlassian, you're letting me down here. We need to get these updated everywhere. We're going to set resolution, and then we're going to set to done. Now, there's 2 ways to set the resolution. This is my preferred way because I don't like to let the user have a decision. I feel like whenever you give the end user options, they're going to mess it up somehow. So I'm a little bit more of a dictator when it comes to this, and I set the resolution for you. But there's another way. The other way to do this, and I'm going to show you right now, is if you go back into your workflow, you can actually add what's called a transition screen. And it works very similar, right? So we click on the transition, but this time instead of clicking on options, we're going to click on edit. And this time, never rename the status, never do that. But if you see here, we have a screen, right? And then Jira ships with something called resolve issue screen. And so if you select that and you click on save, when you transition to done, the user is going to see a pop-up that says pick your resolution, and then you can go to done. Do not do both. Do not do the post function and the screen, because what's going to happen is the user is going to be prompted with the resolution. They're going to pick a value, whatever value they pick, and then it's going to go to done. Then the post function is going to trigger and it's going to override what you just did. Also, Rodney, we kind of I was telling you this last week. I tested this, and you do not need a validator for resolution. Resolution you will not let you leave none, so it will kind of self validate itself. Liz says so. Issue equals work items, but work equals items tracked in Jira. Yeah, it's not confusing. This is a month old news, but Jira has a banner saying it's the first time in Jira for me. Okay, So we've added a resolution. Again, do not do both of these. Don't add that because this will break things. Okay. Now let's talk about validators. So validators are interesting. And so the best way to explain a validator is to show you what validators you can add. And so if you click on validators, you can compare dates. You can make a field required. So Rodney was saying, hey, you need to add a validator. Well, what I could add if I wanted to, right, is I can say, okay, if I don't do the post function, let's assume I don't do the post function, I need to make sure my resolution is set. So if I click on this, if I add this validator, make sure the resolution is set, Jira will not let the user transition from in review to done if a resolution is not set. So this is a great way. Um, this is a great way to make a field required, but not at the beginning when you hit the create button, but rather almost towards the end. So this validators are a great way. There's a couple of other ones, but again, in the interest of time, go check them out on your own. Then we have conditions. Conditions are also very cool because this is kind of preventative. So this basically makes it so that only whatever condition you pick here, but if you meet the condition, then the transition can be done. If not, then the transition won't be able to be done. And so, long story short, if you wanted only admins or if you wanted only your Scrum Master or some particular user, right? Or maybe you want a value in a specific field, right? Maybe you have a components and you only want whenever you have a component of X, then you want to transition instead of doing an automation rule, which costs you money, you can just add like a value field. Or if you wanted to restrict, like only the Scrum Master can move it to done or something, then you can create a group or a custom field and set it up here. So there are conditions. Again, take a look at all of these. There's a few options, but keep in mind that this happens before. And so the effect here is when a user goes to transition from in review to done, they will not see done as an option if they don't meet the condition. So keep that in mind that it prevents users. Okay, so with that said, we're basically at the finish line. We have one last thing to do because we've been creating this amazing workflow, but it's still inactive. So how do we make a workflow active, right? And so to do that, we need to go into a Jira project. And I'm going to go to this company B1, and you're going to force a habit, man. Where is my project settings not up here? It should be up here. Okay, well, I now need to go over here, go to my project settings, go to workflows, and I'm simply going to add a workflow. Now, you'll notice that when I'm clicking on it, it won't let me, and that's because this is shared. And so now I have to make another existential crisis decision, which is, well, two projects are going to get this update. And so I don't want that to happen. So now I have to go re-architect the whole thing. So that's a whole another conversation for another much more advanced conversation. And so we're going to go do it to another workflow that hopefully lets me do it. So we're going to come to this project. And here I'm going to click on the add workflow. I'm going to add existing. And I'm going to go find my workflow. So I think I had the word demo in it, software demo, I think. Somebody stop me when you see it. Boy, have I had my Jira for a while. Software demo, software demo. Somebody see software demo? I don't think you can do a control F on these. Oh boy, why can I not say? Oh, there it is. Workflow for software demo is the last one. I don't know how to read. Okay, you're gonna click on next. This is where you can pick which work item type or work type, which work type gets the workflow. I'm gonna give it to all of them. You click on finish, and then you would think you're done. But my friends, you are not. The last thing is to hit this publish button up here, and now you're technically done. And so because of this, because we swapped out a status, Jira's going to go, hold up, wait a minute, back it up. You remove the status of mine. What do you want it to be? And so now you have to pick from the new statuses which one you want it. So in this case, I want them all to go to new. You click associate, and once you do that, then you are good to go. Then you're going to publish it. And then my favorite part about being a Jira admin is you get paid to watch paint dry. And so this is my favorite part. And you just wait for this to happen. You hit acknowledge, and then you're good to go. Okay. And at that point, your workflow is now active, right? In fact, if I go back to the gear and go to work items and I go to inactive under the workflows and I put demo, it will not show up. It's not there because it's now under active. And so now if I look up demo, you can see that it's right here It's active. I can edit it. Guess what I cannot do? I can't delete a status. Sorry, remove a status. That won't be possible anymore. And so here's my workflow. It's now active. It's shared by one project. Awesome. So, folks, we are basically at the end. I think I got almost everything. I just want to let you know I have two courses on Udemy. I'm going to be dropping links to both. They're both $12.99, but I would highly encourage you. I just dropped a new one for Agile based project management. And so check that one out. It's a brand new course. It's been out for maybe a week and already have 100 students in it. So if you want to grab it, you might have missed the free version because it was free last week, first 100 students. But now we're running a promo for the rest of the month at $12.99. So go check that one out. And then you also get this one here. This is my old one, my fundamentals. That's just very, very basic Jira 101. And so if you need somebody on your team, somebody that's new, share that other one with them because it's a very good basic beginners one. Now, that one's going to be updated because Jira has been updated to the new UI. So I am working on some updates, but you get the updates for free. So definitely take advantage of the promotion now. Also, we're almost halfway through the year. And so here's what's left. We got forms and creating issues. We got screens next month. We got custom fields, field configuration. So we are going to continue down our journey of being a Jira admin. So make sure you sign up for the rest of them. So if you enjoyed this class, again, make sure you sign up for the rest. Tell your coworkers, tell everybody else that you know, sign up for them. They're really, really cool classes and you can learn a lot. And so I also have a Jira for beginners. I have this Jira for admins. I have Jira for Scrum Masters. So if you're more on the Agile side, you're going to like this. And then I have the Jira Advanced Roadmaps over here. So lots and lots of options here for you. And the year's, again, not even halfway through yet. So I highly recommend that you take a look at that link and sign up for our class or two or three or all of them. So anyways, thank you so much, Biomedic. I appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was fun. I got to run because we're actually going to continue the party. And so I'm going to drop a link here, shameless plug. But if you're studying for ACP 620, Ronnie and I are currently in the middle of studying for this. So I'm going to drop this link here. Sign up if you're free for the next hour. I'm going to go get some water, do a quick bathroom break, but the fun continues in 3 minutes. So we're gonna keep it going, and we'll see you over in the other course. So thank you all for being here, and have a great day. Bye.